Welcome to Whole Team Eats Podcast, a 24/8 media production. Ever wonder who trains your favorite athlete? Join Tim Miller as he takes a look at the behind-the-scenes training of professional and collegiate athletes. Tim connects with trainers, athletes, and others in the sports community to share their stories. This podcast is dedicated to highlighting the work of athletes and trainers to inspire action and build community.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to an all-new episode of Whole Team Eats Podcast. This is episode 10, season 2. I'm your host, Tim Miller, and on this show, I sit down with Ricky Stanzi, co-owner of GLS GOATA. Growing up, it was all sports all the time for Ricky. Ricky describes how always having something to do in the competitive arena was helpful for his desire to take a deep dive into training to better understand his full potential. It was also helpful for Ricky to grow up with a dad who was a boxer and a Golden Glove champion in Cleveland. On the show, we discuss Ricky's career in the NFL and how injuries led him into training full-time after his playing career. Ricky spent countless hours researching different styles of training, documenting his discoveries and breakthroughs. Once Ricky discovered GLS GOATA and connected with trainer Gary Scheffler, he knew it was the next step in training for himself and for others. Ricky is now a co-owner of GLS GOATA and is determined to bring his findings in training to more than just athletes. It's my pleasure to introduce Ricky Stanzi, co-owner of GLS GOATA, to the show. Ricky, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Tim.
Yeah, it's great to finally have you on. We've obviously done an episode with your business partner, Gary Scheffler of GLS GOATA in the past. But glad to finally hear everything from your perspective. So where my episodes usually start is talk about your training over the past year, but let's really just talk about how it's been so far in 2023.
Yeah, it's been a great year. Like you mentioned, Gary and I taking over ownership of GOATA. So we've kind of been, putting our heads together, creating the vision, creating the culture that we want around the name, and really fine-tuning the system, really fine-tuning how we're going to educate other coaches in the system, and what are the best ways to onboard a client, whether it's our own athletes or Gen Pop that we're working with, but more importantly, our coaches and sort of their community, their clientele. We've done a lot of work to reverse engineer those global laws. And now it's a case of creating, strong, easy to understand education around those global laws, and then an easy to understand system to sort of implement those global laws so that our athletes and our Gen Pop can, start to, get some of the benefits from this system, whether it be getting out of pain or increasing performance. So that's been a big focus lately for Gary and I. And, we've been able to kind of bring some of that stuff to life with our new website, GOATAMovement.com, and just all the work we've put into those two products, really the online, recode programs, and then our coaching programs or our certification.
Yeah, and we'll go into, you guys as trainers, and you guys have an emphasis on corrective movements and corrective exercises compared to some of the other trainers we talk to. But you mentioned obviously getting up and running as a business and a partnership with Gary. We'll talk about the training in a second, but how has it been besides the training part of it, becoming a business owner and obviously transitioning into that role as well?
It's pretty cool. I mean, this whole thing for me was a slow evolution of being interested in movement, deep diving movement from a multitude of of lenses, if you will, Eastern art, Western art, and kind of learning the nuts and bolts, the X's and O's of human movement and what it entails and how we can build programs around it. And now it's like when you shift to owning the business, now you're thinking about email funnels, and you're thinking about color schemes, and you're thinking about fonts, and you're thinking about content. So it's definitely given me a new outlook. Like I was telling Gary the other day, I've learned so much about technology in the last year, whether it's at a beginner's level, nonetheless, really seeing what you can sort of get out of social media, get out of some other apps. And there's a lot that's out there right now for somebody that's building an education type business online, and so many people are, pushing their brand or pushing their product through Instagram. So it's a very cool time because there's a ton of independence that comes with these types of businesses, these types of endeavors. And it's also fun because for someone like me, I feel like I'm always learning something new. Whether it's how to produce an email funnel or how to write an email, and just thinking through those things, honestly, it's also helped on the back end of, putting together the programs. Like, as funny as that sounds, but like writing an email and trying to be as concise, or, trying to boil down the nuts and bolts or the X's and O's of the message you're trying to get across in a clear and concise way through the social media or email medium helps you sort of conceptualize and understand the product on the front end that you're really trying to get the coach or the athlete to understand. So it's really just felt much more organized. I think GOATA early on, to a lot of people, felt decentralized. Like there was a lot of stuff all over the place and they weren't quite sure what was what or where was home base. That's been Gary in mind, focus this past year was, let's get everything under one tent here. Let's get it all clear and concise. Let's have sort of a path for people to walk down, have a path as a coach, have a path as an athlete, and be much more direct with how people conceptualize and understand what, as most people that dive into GOATA, it seems like there's a lot at once. And there is, because it's a paradigm shift, but at the same time, it's very time feasible. It's very user friendly when you start to boil down some of the finer components or some of the constants that we would say. So I've just lately, being in sort of that business role, has been helpful to see both sides. How can we get people to understand it better? But what do those products look like when they're clear and concise and easy to digest for the consumer?
Yeah, having something that's easy to digest is probably number one for consumers. Is, if they don't understand something, or they see it as a huge burden or a learning curve at the forefront of buying a program, it's probably going to create some reluctance among some of those general population type clients. Obviously, you guys deal with a lot of athletes, and it's easy to teach them why they're in your facilities. But trying to make this for the masses is something that I know you guys are going after, and we're here to obviously see what you do with it. And we're excited for what the future holds for both you and Gary and GLS as a whole. But just to take a switch, and I know we'll get back into the business side of things. Obviously, technology has opened a lot of different avenues for trainers like yourselves of how you market your programs, how you find. Obviously, it sounds like you're starting to enjoy the business side of it with email funnels, and obviously you need to be able to craft a clear and concise message, because you could have the best program in the world, but if you're not marketing it correctly or targeting the right audience, it's probably not going to be very successful. But kind of just taking a step back here before we get back into training and the business side of things, just tell us about your background. So obviously, where you grew up, and then where you went to college, and how you progressed. Obviously, you played professional football in the NFL. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and that progression?
Yeah, I mean, growing up, it was, all sports all the time since I can remember. I started Kempo karate 5 years old, and I remember tackle football at 7, and just kind of always having a sport, always having something to do in the competitive arena. And so with that comes the idea of training to kind of find your potential, find your peak performance, if you will. And that was something that just always interested me. I had a father who was a very hard worker and liked to train his body, and had been a boxer, an amateur boxer that had success. He was a Golden Glove champion in Cleveland. So he had always had that framework of, you have to put a lot of time in away from the sport, away from the skill, to kind of harness the skill and to develop it. So that was always interesting to me. I always liked that side of things. And then, playing sports growing up, it kind of narrowed down to football and basketball, and then got, really clear and concise near junior and senior year, where I was like, well, if I'm going to get a D1 scholarship, it's going to be football. It's going to be quarterback. And then came into the fray, some Big Ten schools, a lot of MAC schools. I'm from the Cleveland area, so a lot of MAC schools are around Ohio. So I had a lot of interest there, but I landed on Iowa because also around Ohio is clearly Big Ten country. And I grew up watching Big Ten football. So when I had that opportunity to get into the Big Ten and I got to go see Iowa and we went to a basketball game or whatever, but just to be around it, I was like, yeah, this is where I want to be. And it was a great experience. I mean, Coach Ferentz was and still is the head coach of Iowa, and he's been a cornerstone there. He's been a cornerstone for college football in general, and he was a great person to learn from. So I had an awesome experience in college, and from college, I was fortunate enough to get drafted by the Kansas City Chiefs, and then that was sort of where I got a little bit more interested in movement as I was transitioning from college to pros, trying to find more efficiency, trying to find more details surrounding, my sport, my skill, the act of throwing, just the human body in general. But for me, it was starting as the athlete and starting to kind of shift into, asking the questions of why and how, which sort of naturally transitioned after you're done playing to becoming more of a teacher and more of a coach, and starting to kind of acclimate to that role, which, I obviously, outside of GOATA, I help coach quarterbacks at my high school now. So it's kind of like been that nice blend of starting as a kid, always being an athlete and putting yourself in that competitive arena. Now it's kind of helping people by what I've learned through the experience of sports, and then, couple that with the GOATA system and have a pretty good understanding of, what to do to kind of prevent or to prepare, and what that looks like for a young kid growing up and going through that whole process, that whole funnel of everybody's dream is to try to get to the pros. So I have a unique perspective on things, and it's been a joy to kind of turn around and help teach that to the next generation.
Yeah, I would assume it's always somewhat fulfilling to take your knowledge that you've amassed over the years and kind of turn around and share that knowledge with younger athletes or anybody who is looking for what you've done in the past as a quarterback on the field, or now transitioned into training with GLS. But, I guess you've always been a natural leader. You've always been a natural teacher. Quarterbacks in general, they usually have some of those traits come natural to quarterback, especially somebody who's made it to the levels that you've made at, which is the NFL. So you got drafted by the Chiefs, and then you've obviously transitioned into training since that time. One name that comes to mind when you say Iowa, and so I'm from South Jersey, but one of the running backs who's probably still to this day one of the best running backs to come through South Jersey is Albert Young. And I know, speaking before the show with you, you didn't have a ton of time that you overlapped at Iowa, but just being a quarterback and running back, it really shows that one of the best players we've ever had goes to Iowa, so that the elite level talent that you need to get in there obviously shows some of the skill that you had as a quarterback, and you've kind of taken what you've learned as a quarterback and transitioned and taken that same tenacity with your passion for training. Obviously, you've had just a desire to figure out what goes into the movement. I don't know, was it an injury that sparked that, your want to learn more about movement as you headed into the NFL, or was it just something you were always passionate about?
Yeah, I mean, to kind of piggyback what you're saying about, different athletes coming together, like an Albert Young, in various parts of the country, you're getting the best of the best to come together. And so there's always that question of, what's the most efficient? What's my max potential? Because I've got to match all the talent level that's around me. So I think as an athlete, and probably even furthermore as a quarterback, you're always looking for efficiency. You're always looking for accuracy. You're always looking for the most detailed way, and you ask a lot of questions. You're very curious. So I kind of had all those things working for me. I would say what transitioned me into that role of asking a lot of questions regarding what I've considered now the X's and O's of biomechanics, as opposed to the X's and O's of, offense and defense, was my own throwing motion. I felt like near the end of my senior year, going into the draft, that transition, I just felt like, and I had always felt a little something missing there with the throwing, like something was on the table. There was efficiency that was still left. There was power, whatever it may be, whatever those buzzwords were that were kind of like, what is it that I still have questions on? And that was, I would say, the initial catalyst that moved me in that direction of wanting to know more about this concept of efficiency. I was fortunate enough to work with Tom Martinez, who was Tom Brady's throwing coach since he was 12. He's since passed on, but he was a great mentor for me to start to ask more questions around the throwing motion, start to think in terms of planes of motion, start to map almost movement in that sense, where there's these planes, there's these lines, however it was being sort of formulated to me at that point. It was at least starting to throw the idea up on the wall or on the paper that, hey, there's a right and there's a wrong. And I think that was, for me, the overarching vision board that I maybe had for movement. I remember charting from that moment on, when I started to go into a deeper dive on throwing mechanics, it naturally led to all other avenues of movement starting to get questioned. But I would journal a lot about movement. And it seemed like the question that I was always asking myself was right, wrong, a binary starting to show, like, I try this, it doesn't produce results. I try that, it does. And just kind of going back and forth in that world, or in that mindset, in the world of movement. And like I said, looking at an Eastern art like a yoga, or something similar to those Eastern arts like yoga, martial arts. I was studying Shaolin monks, to Joseph Pilates, to breath work from it was more of just a true interest in movement. But I think there was this idea of like right or wrong, good or bad, and just knowing that, like we started off this part of the discussion with having all these good athletes in one room, knowing that everybody's looking for that 1% better, and then another part of that is this idea, this sort of the white elephant in the room is, how do we stay healthier as a society? Or like, why are there so many injuries? I think you're told, or you're conditioned to not worry about it, or it's just part of the game when you're younger. It wasn't until I got older and I felt like the chronic pain or the injuries had compounded to a point where they were now a nagging injury. They were something that was persistently there. You would have moments where there would be hot spots, you could say, in the body through high school, through college, of course, but nothing that just kind of sat and pestered you for a longer period of time throughout the day. That was what was probably starting to happen towards 2015 for me, and that was where I started to look even further into, okay, there's got to be like a roadmap here. There's got to be a cornerstone that I could work off of. And that was really what ultimately led me to GOATA, was trying to frame that concept of what's right, what's wrong, and how do I find my most efficient version of myself.
Yeah, and it sounds like you found the perfect landing spot with GOATA. How did you eventually find GOATA, find Gary? How did you guys get connected? Is something that you came across on social media or referred to by a friend? How did you actually get involved with GLS GOATA?
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's definitely meant to be, because it just like once it happened, and once we opened up dialogue, once I opened up dialogue with GOATA, it was like I hit the ground running. And before I knew it, I was up at the front of the room teaching the GOATA weekends, and I was the one doing the podcasts. And it just was a perfect, time and moment to be there, to kind of be at the beginning of this thing where they were looking for that leader, that quarterback, that speaker, to kind of go out there and say, hey, this is what it is, right? And I think Gilly also was looking for someone to finish the system. So there was still a lot of details and questions that hadn't been ironed out, but the global laws were up on the board. We got this, the main components are up on the board: head control, back chain dominance, foot control, the bow, the corner, all those things that are staples and that, are what we train off of. That was always there, but we needed to kind of dial in the surrounding parts of the system. So I jump in 2019. What really brought me to them was initially a book called Muscles and Meridians, pointing me to a book called Spinal Engine. So Muscles and Meridians is by Muscles and Meridians is by Philip Beach. Spinal Engine is by Sergei Grakovetsky. Now, the reason that was a big deal at the time was from the world I was coming out of strength training. There was a lot of core bracing principles, a lot of straight line principles. Here comes, Muscles and Meridians, and this is older work too. Like spinal engine's like an 86 book, 84, 85 type, time range. So it's not like the stuff hasn't been out there. It just hasn't been organized. So those concepts were very vague and they are very sort of, on the fringe of movement. But I go on Instagram and there's like one group that's talking about it. It's like, and sure as shit, it's these GOATA guys. And I'm like, what's GOATA? And like, why are they the only ones touching on spinal engine? And then when I started to talk to Gilly, I noticed that a lot of the independent research that I had done, that I had started to think like, okay, this makes too much sense. They had already been there. Like they had already gone through that and were confirming it. And I was like, because I was looking at what Philip Beach was saying in Muscles and Meridians about humans resting on the ground to keep their movement tuned, which is just implying, like I said, there is a right and a wrong. There is a yes and a no, just like a guitar, like a guitar. If there's no gray area. It's tuned or it's not tuned. It's good or it's bad. And so it sounds good or it sounds like crap. And so that was how the movement thing was starting to get into that area for me, which is like, you have enough injury, you start to say like, okay, well, it's not working. It doesn't work. Something's wrong with it. So they were touching on all those concepts. And it was just a case of reaching out through DMs and starting to talk to Gilly. There was starting to talk to Gary Gary was more of that strength coach, that sort of like, I've been around a lot of strength coaches growing up, so it's easy to communicate with them. Gilly was more of like the teacher, like the philosophy, the macro view, the big thinker, big picture ideas. So I would kind of, pick Gilly's brain, pick Gary's brain, and just go back and forth. And they sort of were my mentors in the system. I had my own personal cert in a sense. It felt like I was getting, personal coaching from them. And it was, they were looking for someone to stand up there on lab weekend and teach the system. And so that was where my role started to go. And as I was going through that, we were just kind of cleaning up the system and dialing it in more and making it more user-friendly and making it more, centered around chapters and outlines and the ability to flow through it and have an understanding of what's going on. But it was just, basically me getting onto Instagram and looking for people that were like-minded. And I came across these guys and they were the first people to tell me to go look at evidence and not just trust what they said. That was a huge part of what did it for me. Was Gilly was like, go watch the ACL shreds, go watch the Achilles shreds, and then go watch the conventional training, the Olympic lifting, the power lifting, the straight line movement. Go watch what happens at the foot and ankle. And that was a very big light bulb moment for me. I remember that for certain, because it led me down to where I was like, well, now it's undeniable. I have evidence for the yes and the no. All those questions that I had or that I was journaling, they became crystal clear now. And so I knew that this is the system. Like they've got it. All the questions are it. The more I was in the system, the more sense it made and the easier it was to understand. Whereas other systems before, they looked great at the beginning. And then when I would get into the system and then as I would ask questions, they would start to kind of unravel. They didn't have the answers. As I kept going and drilling with questions, they fell apart and just kind of sounded gimmicky, where this one was like, as you asked more questions, like the knot got tighter. Like you couldn't get out. Like as you kept asking questions at GOATA and you kept trying to challenge it, because it was like, once you asked one question, you didn't understand. I didn't quite conceptualize the butterfly effect of seeing the system as integrated. So it's like, well, if inside ankle bone high is right, then that means that, and it was like, well, now you're trapped because you can't get out of that truth. And then it's like, well, the bow has to be correct. And then you learn about the bow. And like, so the knot just kept getting tighter around the truth with GOATA. And I was like, this makes too much sense. And so that was really kind of the beginning of me jumping into the system. And then me and Gary we've been on the phone every day since. Just being on the same page and dialing in, our vision for this thing.
Yeah, it sounds like your vision of what you wanted to become as a trainer moving into this world and what they had already kind of had in place at that point, it was the perfect match. And you were somewhat of that missing link. You needed each other to get to where GOATA is today, and it's only been a few years. So you guys are still just getting up and running at this point. You guys have a lot to still develop and bring to not only just athletes, but to the masses. And you guys are located in Louisiana. Obviously, it's a hotbed of talent down there with high school and collegiate athletes who are going to big time Power 5 schools. And you guys have worked with a lot of athletes at this point. As you started your training career, Has it been, is there like a difference training athletes versus general population clients? Do you feel an extra level of, I guess you could call it responsibility within athletes? Or is it just, I'm training the biomechanics of, the principles of GOTA and what's kind of in place at this point? Is it the same for everybody, or is it different when you're working with different clients?
That's a great question. There is definitely a one size fits all component to GOTA. But of course, inside of that one size fits all umbrella, there's a way to sort of branch off from the root or some sort of the trunk and kind of maybe take a different route at the beginning for somebody versus somebody else, just depending on their starting point. We're all trying to get to the same end goal, but how we start that process off might be different, or usually can be different for different body types, different age ranges, different goals. If somebody's just trying to get to the end of the driveway, or get up and down from their couch or their bed or their desk without being in pain, those goals are much easier to attain than, let's say, I'm a kick returner in the NFL, or I'm a linebacker, I'm an offensive lineman, and I've now got to deal with the pressures of the cut, the juke, the jump, the bull rush, all those different, those are the more pressure packed situations you're going to be in, the more sense of urgency I think we have as coaches at GOTA. Whereas if you're Gen Pop and you're just trying to get out of pain, that's really easy. We're a little bit more fragile with those. We're a little more, we take things slower with that type of population. Whereas an athlete, we may speed them up through the system a little bit more, give them more to chew on at the beginning than somebody that's, like I said, if somebody comes to the system with sciatic pain, they're already hurt, they're older, maybe they're trying to put off a knee replacement. I think that process, you slow it down a little bit for them, you get them comfortable. Whereas if you're an athlete, they're a little bit more resilient. They're usually younger. They may have injuries, but they haven't really gotten into that upper age range, not upper age range, but from a musculoskeletal system standpoint, it feels like upper age range for our population. And I'm talking age 35 plus. It's still a young system, but with this population and the way it's breaking down, that's technically old in the it's acquired quite a bit of compounding injury or stress at that point. So there is a one size fits all. There is a roadmap that we're taking everybody back on. I like to say that basic blueprint is from all fours to a single leg. Everybody's going to work through that journey. Now, how fast they can work through that journey usually depends. Obviously, your athletes will go faster. Your older population will go slower. But we're all trying to get to the end goal, which is we want those global laws, those things that were first observed to be durable amongst the population. We want our system to reflect that, right? We want to have those behaviors etched into our system. And so it's no different than if you're trying to change a social behavior, a relationship behavior, a school, behavior at school, behavior of your dog. Like, you're going to rep it out. It's just movement behavior now. So we're going to rep out good movement behavior. And that is the main goal. How we sort of give that to a nervous system is really just dependent upon that person and what their goals are and what they're able to do at this current point.
And just to focus on the athlete side of things for a second. So you guys are, and correct me if I'm wrong, but somewhat building the foundation of the athlete from a movement perspective, right? Because for an athlete, and you know this as a former NFL athlete, it's your livelihood,
Mm-hmm.
right? So your number one thing as an athlete is your availability.
Yes.
And without availability, you can't make a living. So how are you guys, and like what type of responses from athletes who you've trained? Like, what has the feedback been from those athletes that you've trained?
Yeah, it's been I'd say recently it's been really good. And the reason for that is, like I said earlier, when Gary and I took over things and there was kind of, a dispersal at GOTA and things got tighter as far as who was making decisions. Well, it was easier for Gary and I to build a clear and concise program where there wasn't any distractions. We were in agreement with how we were going to rehabilitate people. There was no kind of tug of war anymore inside of GOTA. And what we found, like I said just a minute ago, was all fours to single leg, was the way to go. We were getting our best results through that sort of passage. And inside of that sort of journey, we noticed that we had to get them back to child rockers, we had to get them back to toe tucks, and we had to get them back to bolt. And then we needed to get them away from support. So we were using support to help you not fall over, but we were trying to make sure that the athlete understood that how they organize the pressure, how they organize the foot, what their tail to crown looks like, those are crucial things. And they had to keep those constants throughout all their exercises. So with our athletes, there is an install that comes with GOATA. Like there is, no matter who you are, there's this initial like, okay, are you ready for the deep dive? Like there's some sort of like, I'm going to tell you what this is, because when you say GOATA, nobody knows what it means. And so when they ask further, you say, well, it's an acronym. It stands for greatest of all time actions. It naturally leads into, well, then what are those actions? And now you're talking about those global laws, and who's ever in front of you, you're going to essentially show them what they look like in comparison to the ideal. So every athlete that's walked through that door in this off season, Gary's going to talk to them a little bit about, here's the ideal setup for the human body. Like here's how we found it to be designed based off of our evidence, looking at the world's most durable humans, looking at the world's most fragile humans, then cross-referencing that with the anatomical design. Here's how you're supposed to move, how you're supposed to stand, walk, run, all that stuff. Here's you. So initially the athlete gets this, okay, like, well, here's where I am currently. Here's where I need to go. I'm here currently, and this is why I'm experiencing back pain, Achilles pain, knee pain. Generally, the athlete that comes through our doors has had an ACL, has had an Achilles, fears an ACL or an Achilles because things are feeling tender or susceptible in that area. So there is some sort of why, generally, that's already walking through the door. And our assessment kind of paints that picture for them of like, oh, this explains a lot of why I'm hurting. And then it also backs up how I'm going to fix it. So then from there, like I said, we'll start them in all fours and we'll progress them through these positions that are big picture going to create space in the system again. So if the system has space, then it can turn. When it's turning properly, it's healthy. So we essentially create space, get the turns back we have a very unique outlook on how the foot and the ankle interact. It's different than any other system in the world. And so because we use that template for rehabilitating the foot and the ankle, it's unmatched as far as what the feedback is from our athletes. They feel stronger. They feel more supple. They feel more endurance. Their strength numbers go up. Their speed numbers go up. The aesthetics start to take a better shape. But for them, it's a bit of a mind melt because they're not holding weight anymore, right? They're not necessarily stretching or needing to foam roll, or they're requiring less time, but more focus on a very specific sort of regimen, a very specific plan. And they're noticing the up levels in sort of everything around them. Now, most of our athletes that show up, they'll usually tell the story of, well, after hearing about GOATA for the third or the fifth time, I was like, well, I might as well come over here and see this. And to be honest, some of them look at it almost from a beginning point, like, this is too good to be true. Like, there's just no way that, like, how is child rockers making my back feel better? You know, I've been to every PT, I'm in the NFL, I have all the best doctors, but they can't figure out my back. They can't figure out my hamstring, but you guys are figuring it out. And it's getting to the point now where athletic trainers from NFL teams are calling Gary and they're saying, what did you do with so-and-so? Because we couldn't get him there. We couldn't get him to that point in the rehabilitation process. What are you doing different? And then that's where it's like another red pill, because you're like, well, we have a different template for the foot and the ankle. We have a different way of reorganizing and hitting reset. Like we all came up in that Nintendo generation where you take out the cartridge, you blow on it, you put it back in, you'd hit reset on the system and everything would be back to normal. We are doing that with people's nervous systems. We're just using a very unique blueprint because we have a very unique way of studying. And so now we're in this area of the industry where we're able to do things that no one else is able to do because they're just not working off of the same blueprint. So it's been eye-opening for our athletes. They're getting a lot of education. They're starting to ask better questions. And I think they feel more comfortable discussing movement, discussing their personal movement. And this is where I feel proud about it, is They get to talk to their doctors. They get to talk to their coaches. They get to elaborate more on why they're doing something and how they're going to go about that, as opposed to just being like a victim to the system and just be like, well, I got to run through this gauntlet of physical therapy and I can't do anything else because I don't know any better. It's like when you go to a mechanic, you don't know what the heck that piece is or whatever. You don't get to even speak on it. You have no knowledge on it. When we give the athlete knowledge, they feel empowered, and now they feel like I got to go help my buddy, but I also got to push back on any BS that I might be getting from those around me, and they start to take control, and I think they feel empowered by that.
Yeah, you gave a very interesting analogy of how you're actually helping to reset an athlete's body through the obviously the game system analogy. But you've kind of, what it sounds like from our perspective or an outsider's perspective who's never actually gone through your program, is you're taking conventional thinking and conventional training, and you're kind of re-engineering the way that things are done. And sometimes it's somewhat of a leap of faith from an athlete to really trust that program, but the more questions they ask, and nowadays I would just assume in the last 10 years athletes are starting to ask why and what is the purpose of doing this more than they used to, say, 20 years ago, and asking why, and you guys being able to back up those questions with, here's why, here's the blueprint, here's the plan, here's what we get from point A to point B, and kind of the proof is in the pudding type of thing, where the athletes come in and now they're going back to their doctors, they're able to fix something that nobody else around them was able to attack in a successful manner, and it's really proving your system, like the value of it and what you guys have spent a lot of time putting together. We've talked a lot about the athletes to this point in time. You obviously are trying to use this for general population clients as well. And one program I know you guys have been working on is, I believe it's Recode 225. Is that correct?
That's it.
Can you tell us a little bit about, if just a minute or two on Recode 225 for our listeners?
Yeah. No, it's been a long time in the making, and it was originally built around the idea of being something that you graduated to. Like it was like the end, workout, sort of the peak of the mountain where you're going to crush this performance workout. And it still is that, but we've kind of built a nice base layer inside of Recode 225 that we call our Recode program. And so Recode 225 is going to be our subscription-based website that is a one-size-fits-all. This is, if you're a 50-year-old dad who's trying not to get his knee replaced and you're not trying to get into any cutting, juking, or jumping, you just want comfort, you want the bare minimum, this system works for you. It also works for Dre Cisco, who is a DB with the Jacksonville Jaguars. Like there's something in there for everybody. It's scalable. It's a built-in progression. And if you're somebody that's just looking for correctives, just looking for some baseline education, just looking for some simple correctives and some easier exercises to get you out of pain, it's got that. But then it'll also take you step by step through our system, through our Recode program, and it eventually leads up to a weekly workout. So what we did was we took what Gary and I had been having a ton of success with as far as getting people recoded and getting them out of pain, but getting their movement to look different on tape. And we took that and we made it into a one-size-fits-all Recode program. It's a 16-week Recode program. There's 4 basic components to it, with 2 exercise routines at each component, building the foundation, the bilateral pressure wave, 2 legs, a single leg, and then mastering the pressure wave. And so it just guides you through our GOATA system. It takes you nice and slow so your body can acclimate. And it's basically the, how do I recode myself, on my own time situation. And it puts it, in an easy to understand format where you got the videos, you've got all the tutorials right there in front of you. Then once you finish through that Recode program, now you got the performance workout at the end. And like I said, athletes do the performance workout. You're somebody that's just looking to get out of pain, you might just stick to the Recode program or the correctives, but it's got all that education and all those exercises and those easy to follow programs in one spot, which is off of GoToMovement.com. It's called Recode 225.
Yeah, and that's something I know you guys have been very excited about for some time. We're very excited to see where that program goes. We've been following it very closely as well. So we'll continue to follow that program and the success that hopefully it has with not just athletes, but general population clients as well. And it goes without saying, it's pretty evident that you can kind of see the passion that you have and what you do every single day. But what does a normal week look like training wise for you? Like, are you, uh, you know, in the gym? Are you working behind the scenes on the
Mhm.
business? Like, what does a normal week look for you at this point?
Yeah, a lot of, I have the ability to work from home, so that's nice where it's kind of let me be a jack of all trades. Like I said, I'll be writing emails or I'm, doing voiceovers. And for me, it's a lot of, and it has been since I started with Goda. Every day I'm slow motion, I'm doing a voiceover slow motion for somebody. It might be an athlete that's at Gary's gym that, Gary's bringing me in to give a unique perspective for a pitcher or a swing artist like a baseball player or a golfer. Maybe it's looking at a program that Gary just put together and kind of putting our heads together on it and seeing where an exercise might fit in better. And then we have movement assessments that are coming in through Go to Movement all the time. And so those people, I'm kind of introing them to the movement system, to GOTA. I'm showing them their assessments. I'm showing them how to get started with these basic exercises. I'm more or less being a guide for them. And so a lot of it's just fortunately done through the phone. A lot of these voiceovers are nice and easy. Somebody sends you a video, you put it in through the app and you're able to kind of draw over it. And it's really cool technology. It's a very simple to use medium, a very simple to digest medium of slow motion, slow motion video is frame by frame because you can't hide on the tape. So my favorite form of coaching is when somebody's asking a question, it might be comment section, might be, in the DMs. I'm like, just send me a video. Like, let me, it's because it's easier than somebody trying to type out how they're feeling. It's so much easier. Just send me a video. And then it lets me kind of work from home and get a lot of videos out to people to kind of help them understand the exercises better, help them understand the positions better, help them understand where they are currently, as far as their own body, their own injuries, take inventory on where they are. That's where I've been a big help is doing a ton of assessments and then going over people's exercises and then helping build better programming either through our system or various coaches that reach out and have a question.
Yeah, that's super interesting that you're able to just take it frame by frame and break it down for folks in real time with voiceovers and obviously creating little visuals for clientele. And you're right, you've probably found out over your entire playing career, good or bad, that you can't run from the tape, right? There's been a lot of different instances, especially as a
Yep.
quarterback, right? You come off a game, maybe 3 interceptions. There's no running from that tape. So it's the same with training, right? If you're moving a certain way, the tape's not going to lie, and you're able to help clients in real time, which is great. Just to wrap up here, Ricky, obviously you've been through a lot from where you were as an athlete to kind of evolving into your training and finding your passion for movement, and then connecting with Gary and Gilly and GLS, and getting where you are today. But what advice would you have for your younger self that could be, I guess, younger self meaning, I guess, in the training sense of things, not the athlete side of things? And would you change anything about your path to where you are today?
I've always been and for me specifically, I feel fortunate because my playing career has just been a journey or a transition into my teaching and my coaching to where it feels like one continuous journey where I've been learning. I haven't had to like stop and like, okay, well, all that information is kind of throw it in the closet because I'm not using it because I'm doing this job now. It's like, no, all that information from 5 years old till my last day playing football, I'm now able to harness that information, use the experience, and it's made me a better coach, a better teacher. So I always look back on my journey with very very grateful outlook for everything that happened. I wouldn't change a thing. And if I were to talk to my younger self, I would just keep saying, hey, be curious, ask questions. Don't be afraid to ask, well, why or how, because those questions have always led to a paradigm shift. That's what how GOTA starts is through Gilly asking those questions of like, well, why is everybody injured? How are they injured? Like those questions have always been a crucial part for me as an athlete, but even more so for me as a teacher and a coach. So I wouldn't change anything. And if anything, I feel very fortunate and blessed to, I've seen a lot of people have to transition. Obviously sports is short lived, whether you like it or not. I mean, even Tom Brady's young in the real scope of things. So it's like, everybody's time generally ends before they want it to. So there is this transition to a second career. I feel fortunate and blessed that my transition to the second career got to use and exploit all the information that I've had in my first career. So, like I said, it's a really cool outlook. It's helped me. It's helped me help a lot of other athletes already, including near and dear to my heart, which is the quarterback position. So it's been cool because I've been able to help the quarterback position with GOATA and still have a spin on things, if you will, in that tiny microcosm of movement. But then it's also let me not be sort of stuck in that world and only available to quarterbacks, to where now I work with any athlete of any caliber across the world, and not just athletes, but Gen Pop. So you're able to kind of help humans as a whole, but then also narrow down to a very specific detail-oriented position like quarterback using the same system. So it's been great. I mean, I'll tell you this, those years that I was journaling and writing down questions and trying to figure it out were frustrating and felt like a lot of dead ends. And I think that's probably one piece of advice I would give to anybody that's out there right now, and whatever it is that they're doing, is that I've looked back so many times on things that I thought were dead ends that ended up being actual catalysts or big parts of a bigger equation, a bigger algorithm that made a bigger picture come into focus as I went through the process. But it was just keep going through the process, keep questioning, and don't get discouraged when it seems like you're going to a dead end, because those moments where you're like fighting for an answer or you're looking for a clue, there's just like on the back end of those, there's usually huge breakthroughs. And I think people get really frustrated at that part. And I've known there to be a lot of frustrations for me looking through human movement, but the biggest frustrations always led to the biggest breakthroughs. So anybody listening, if I was to look to my younger self, it would just be, keep chugging along, which is pretty cliche. But I think that whenever I get discouraged, I get excited a little bit, because in my past, what I've noticed is the discouraging moments, like I said, there's always something good coming off of the back end of that. So there's actually a reason to be excited for it.
Yeah, and I think that it's extremely important for anybody who's listening to continually question and ask why for whatever they're working on. And sometimes asking those questions and asking why continuously, like in your case, can lead to some of the most important and creative solutions of how to attack those whys. So it's obviously helped you to get to the point where you are, and you've had a natural progression from all the time when you're 5 years old till finishing your playing career and all your journaling that you put in. It wasn't time that was wasted. Obviously, everything kind of came and accumulated together to get to where you are today. So we appreciate you coming on and telling your story. We're very excited to see where both you and Gary and GOATA go from here. There's a lot still to be get started, and things that have already been started, but we're really excited to see where all the programs, Rico 225 and everything else that you guys are working on, where it evolves in the next couple years, and ultimately next decade. We think there's a lot of potential for you guys. So once again, Ricky Stanzi, co-owner of GLS GOATA, appreciate you coming on.
Thanks, Tim. Appreciate you.